The Texas Revolution by Brianna, Sydney, Mitch, and Avery.
Okay, so you think you really know about the Texas Revolution? It was about a bunch of little guys in sombreros chased David Crockett and his crew with muskets, right? Wrong.
As a matter of fact, there's a lot more to it than just that. But to understand what really happened to Texas in the 1820s to 40s, you'll have to go back, way back.
Our story starts here in the Texas Territory. Texans originally belonged to Mexico, so to the Americans, it was basically hands off. There's one guy who started to change all that, though, and his name was Moses Austin. He was a well-off businessman and banker whose dream was to eventually colonize Texas and use its good planting climate to plant crops. The soil was especially good for planting cotton, which gave the people from the South yet another reason to settle there.
In 1821, Austin was granted a humongous piece of land in Texas from the Mexican government. Soon, 279 families joined him there to plant crops and have their own land. Things were seemingly going well for the colonists.
Unfortunately, it wasn't always sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows in Texas. The tensions were always mounting between the Texans and Tejanos, which were local Mexicans in Texas. The Tejanos complained that the Texans were disrespectful to them and their customs, and didn't even like the fact that Texans were there in the first place. The Texans didn't like to be governed by anyone but themselves, and they liked that they had to speak, read, and write in Spanish. The government and Mexico became so tired of the complaints and the fact that the Texans wouldn't become Mexican citizens, so they decided to close any further immigration.
The Texans didn't like that one bit, and soon talk of revolution went around. Stephen F. Austin, the son of late Moses Austin, said that he would go negotiate with Mexico's dictator, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, on terms of independence. Santa Anna didn't want to bargain with him, and he certainly didn't want what he thought was rebellion in Texas. The general just threw Austin in jail because he was the one supposedly who was promoting rebellion. 2 years later, Stephen F. Austin was released, and the Texans were madder than ever. General Santa Anna wouldn't have revolt, so he sent his troops after the rebels. It was just the beginning of the Texas Revolution.
Months later, the beaten-up Texan rebels stationed themselves in an old mission called the Alamo. Recognize the name? A couple of famous faces were there too. David Crockett, William Travis, and James Bowie were just a few of them. In total, there were about 188 volunteers, including a few Tejanos. That was nothing compared to all of Santa Anna's troops, though. When he sent them a message to surrender, despite them being far outnumbered, they answered with a loud cannon shot.
Even though the Texans fought gallantly, everyone died during the fight except a few soldiers who were executed on the spot and the women and children who escaped. To the Texans, this was the final call to arms. Even though the leader of the Texas Revolutionary Army, Sam Houston, and the soldiers wanted to rush and get revenge on the Mexican army, they were forced to retreat from their advancing enemy. His plan was to lead Santa Anna and his troops deeper into the Texas wilderness in hopes that Mexican army would become low on supplies. No one knew how effective this tactic would be.
When Santa Anna finally caught up to the Texans, he expected them to attack at dawn. He kept his troops awake all night so they would be ready for the attack. When it didn't come, they let their guards down, just as the Texans predicted. Then Houston initiated his surprise attack on the Mexicans. They rushed out, guns and arms, yelling, "Remember the Alamo!" This attack was a quite surprise and was an easy win for the Texas Revolutionary Army. They captured General Santa Anna, and in exchange for his release, he agreed to send all his troops out of Texas, therefore making it an independent nation.
For about 10 years, Texas remained its own country. There was constant arguing, though, of whether or not to make it part of the U.S. One of the worries we had was that if we tried to annex Texas, it might throw the entire U.S. into war with Mexico. In 1845, when James K. Polk was elected, he decided to admit Texas as the 20th state of the United States anyway. This action would help fuel more tension with the Mexicans and eventually the Mexican-American War. It would also help our growing nation to expand and progress farther. The end.